It's gone 9:15 a.m. If you have just tuned in, we welcome you to the show. We're staying in the company of Salam Media listeners and also our listeners on One Nation 88.9 FM out of Polokwane this morning. Now, South Africa's economy has been under the radar, has been under close scrutiny for a very, very long time. And for an economy like ours at this point in time that is not doing too well, which is volatile, there are many triggers that impact on the economy of the country. And one of these triggers we are talking about this morning is we're talking about a financial grey list. And this is threatening the economy and could possibly even derail the economy further. And to understand what the challenges are, what are the risks of being added to a financial grey list, we joined on the line this morning by economist Reezwana Sumad. Rizwana, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam. Jazakallah for having me.
Yes, wonderful you're able to join us. Let's just talk about this term, financial grey list. And as I mentioned, there are triggers that could impact negatively on the South African economy and the threat of even derailing the country's economy further.
Yes, so the grey list is a list of countries that are under increased monitoring but working to resolve deficiencies in money laundering, terrorism financing, and prosecuting illegal cash flows and crime. So the reason why countries are put on this on the grey list is because the the financial action task force seems to believe that these countries need to do more work from a regulatory perspective to identify and prosecute these illicit cash flows. We have been given a year to 12 months until October 2022 to provide us indication that we are progressing from a regulatory perspective to stop and prosecute these illicit cash flows. In October, the task force will decide whether or not we enter the grey list.
Well,
For
Rizwana, it
instance,
is clear that the Financial Action Task Force that you speak of has flagged deficiencies in South Africa and in our financial controls in particular. Now, let's just talk about, what some of these deficiencies possibly are, and also what does South Africa need to do?
so South Africa's South African transactions rather is regulated by the FIC, the Financial Intelligence Center. Essentially, consumers would be scrutinized using FICA when they open bank accounts or transact in large amounts. The deficiencies that they have particularly identified is with regard to prosecuting illegal cash flows and crime. Given the sort of corruption that we've been seeing in news articles and journalism that have taken place over the last 4 to 5 years, have really placed a spotlight in terms of whether or not South Africa is doing enough to clamp down on some of the illicit and illegal cash flows, and hence it has resulted in us possibly being placed on this grey list.
Yes, and when we talk about illegal cash flows, we're talking about businesses, we're talking about individuals, we're talking about offshore interests, and also at the
Yes,
same time, we've seen in the past, we've seen revelations come through like the Panama Papers, and it's all about due diligence and making absolutely sure that we are applying higher levels of due diligence to South African businesses and also individuals.
yes, and notwithstanding that, you can be a country like Pakistan that has done significant improvements in terms of their diligence, but still be on the grey list because the Financial Action Task Force needs to seek the consistent application of the regulations and the prosecuting capacity. So the threat is that perhaps South Africa enters the grey list, but it takes a number of years to be removed from that grey list. Again, like in Pakistan's experience.
Now, Rizwana, where does the accountability and the responsibility lie to ensure that we are not high risk, and being added to the grey list has got serious, it's got devastating consequences for the country and the economy. And yeah, I'm referring to accountability and responsibility on the part of
Yeah.
politicians, on the part of bureaucrats.
Yeah, so definitely government is responsible for this, particularly National Treasury, which oversees the FIC, the Financial Intelligence Center. And they have started discussing tightening sort of regulation, particularly with regards to large transactional volumes. So, for example, National Treasury has recommended that that transactions above 100,000 of high value goods, essentially cars, cruiser vans, etc., be regulated and passed and flagged through SIC and through National Treasury itself, so that they can investigate whether these funds are legit or possible proceeds or whitewashing of some of the cash. So yes, National Treasury has done a lot. FIC has done a lot, but I think this possible flagging of the grey list tells us, as a small emerging market country, that we need to do a lot more from a regulatory standpoint to be able to account to some of the international bodies overseeing this.
Well, it is obvious that this is all about the system within which we operate, Rizwana. And I'm talking about a banking system. And more
Mm.
importantly, we're talking about an international banking system that is going to come under a scrutiny. And this is where the systems need to be foolproof, and also adding extra layers of checks and balances. That when it comes to international banks, when they're dealing with South Africa, when they're dealing with South African clients, and also at the same time looking at institutions like the World Bank and the IMF as well. And this is where the system needs to be tightened, it needs to be foolproof, especially when we are dealing with South Africa, when we're dealing with the South African businesses or even individuals.
Definitely, there's a requirement for tighter regulation, given the sort of proliferation of corruption and crime, not just in South Africa but across emerging markets and advanced economies as a whole. The threat that I mean, the risks, according to the Reserve Bank, that this does pose if we are to be included in the grey list is ultimately higher transactional and administrative costs, not just for banks, and then that flows to consumers, to individuals, but also for businesses, importer, exporter businesses, and the ability, the ease of doing cross-border transactions will become more restrictive or more difficult. So while there is a real need to tighten regulation much more, um, it's not without some of the downsides, some of the risks that we're going to be experiencing locally.
Well, this is clear. This depends on the risk profile as well. And again, when we're talking about what the consequences could be for the country, it's about
Mhm.
South Africa. It is about how South Africa is seen or perceived to be an investment destination. So this is where the problem also comes in, because we know that the country has been calling out for foreign investment in the country. And
Yes.
one looks at the risk profile, and if we are seen as high risk, this could have disastrous consequences, particularly for an economy like ours that is hemorrhaging and that is suffering in more ways than one.
Yeah, so the first sort of hit will come from foreign direct investment capital. Increased scrutiny and a grey listing would mean that foreign investors are more selective as to where they place their cash and investments. And if you look at the current grey list of the 23 countries, most, if not all of them, are small emerging market countries with very, very, very weak growth levels already. There've been quite a few studies done globally, and the number ranges between 30 and 38 billion dollars worth of GDP that has been lost in terms of the countries that have been placed on the grey list. So there's definitely going to be a hit on foreign direct investment, more difficult business conditions, ease of doing business rather becoming more restrictive, and then essentially a decline in GDP over I think a number of years, and not a sort of immediate hit, but we're going to feel it over a period of time when transactional and administrative costs increase and cross-border transactions and foreign flows into SA become more restrictive.
Yes. Now, also, South Africa has been warned about these deficiencies, and as you mentioned, that we have been given a deadline, and I am led to believe that this deadline is October the 22. And we are concerned because we've seen National Treasury obviously talking about making the necessary changes or the much needed changes, but also we've seen a comment come through from the department's acting director general, Ismail Mamoniat, who said that there's a good chance that we could even miss this October deadline. Now, this is of concern, Rizwana.
Yes, so we are behind in terms of proving that we could stay out of the grey list. The Financial Action Task Force will essentially scrutinize our controls in October this year again. And if we are to be included in the grey list, that will be effective of February 2023. So, I mean, we still have a few months, and we know that government and National Treasury have been hands-on and moving quite fast to be able to prove that we do not deserve to be on the grey list. But yes, we've had 12 months, and we're running behind in terms of implementation on some of the requirements of the task force to not be included in the list.
Rizwana, in your opinion, do we have the necessary skills base to ensure that we comply?
Definitely, we've seen a huge increase in the number, especially in the size of banks and financial institutions, compliance departments. So we do have the skills to be able to implement, regulations. We've got a very, very sophisticated financial intelligence center overseeing the FICA Act. And so we have already the skills and the infrastructure in place to move towards more restrictive legislation, money laundering legislation rather. So it all depends on actually getting our ducks in a row essentially to be able to implement some of the regulations.
Well, Ridwana, we appreciate you taking time out, talking to us this morning, addressing this issue. We wish you all the best, and we thank you once again for your time with us this morning.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Economist Reezwana Sumad talking about South Africa and the danger associated with the grey list, and we are talking about money laundering. It's about introducing tighter controls, and the concern that has been expressed by Treasury is South Africa is running out of time to avoid financial grey listing, which could have serious consequences for the country, for its economy as a whole, particularly at a time when we have an economy that is struggling very, very badly. The time is just gone 9:30 a.m. We come back. We'll be talking with the director of the international law at Stoke White, based in the UK. We'll be talking with Hakan Kamuz, Joe Biden making his first journey to the Middle East.